The day they cut off my water wasn't the day I gave up. It was the day I started marking the boundaries for a gun range. I didn't come to the borderlands for peace. I came for space. After losing my brother in a cartel crossfire and my job a month later, I wasn't looking for comfort. I was looking for a place where no one told me how to live. The 80 acres I bought sat dry, windblown, and ragged against the Texas-Mexico border, but it was mine. And when I drilled a well, hauled in solar panels, and started rebuilding the old barn by hand, I felt like I was finally clawing back some kind of control. That illusion shattered with a knock on my gate. 3 trucks, all spotless white, with matching clipboards and HOA stickers on the doors. I didn't even know an HOA existed out here. No paved roads, no mailboxes, just coyotes and desert silence. But the man who stepped out introduced himself with a smug half-smile that told me he already thought he owned me. "Mr. Ridgway," he said, "we're with the Rio Oeste Homeowners Association. You're not listed as a compliant resident." I looked past him at my land. Dust shimmered in the heat. My dogs barked from the porch. I could hear the drip of the well pump running, on backup solar. "I didn't buy into any HOA," I told him. "And this land isn't part of your jurisdiction." He pulled out a folded map. New, crisp, laser printed. "According to recent amendments in the annexation agreement, this property falls under our protective zoning district." That was the first lie. The second came a week later when they claimed my outbuildings were illegal structures. They sent me fines, hundreds of dollars stacked on rules I'd never agreed to. Then came threats. Failure to comply would result in enforcement measures, and access to certain utilities might be impacted. I ignored them. Out here, silence is power. But the next morning, the well was dry. Not just a glitch. The entire pump was fried. Someone had poured sand into the housing. I found prints, boot tracks that weren't mine. The same day, 2 water tanks I'd filled, from a backup supply, had been emptied. Shot clean through. I patched them up, but something had shifted. This wasn't about compliance, it was control. Have you ever watched someone try to unmake your life, piece by piece? Not through confrontation, but through silence? No banging fists. Just passive letters, mysterious outages, and disappearances. That's what made it so dangerous. It made you question your own instincts. But I didn't come to the borderlands to be afraid. A week later, my solar panels stopped charging. A technician friend drove out from El Paso and found the wires cleanly snipped under the frame. Not chewed, not weather damage, just surgical vandalism. I stayed quiet, even then. I slept with a rifle across my lap and my boots on. I didn't call the sheriff. I didn't post online, I just took notes. They wanted to starve me out, to turn my isolation into a weapon. But what they didn't know is that men like me, who've lost everything once, don't fear losing again. We adapt. That night, I sat on my porch with a hand-drawn map and a plan I hadn't spoken aloud in years. Before I bought this land, I worked security for a logistics firm that contracted with the federal government. Part of my job was risk mitigation for remote construction projects, including a few near-border firing ranges used by both law enforcement and civilian training academies. I still had the blueprints. I still knew the zoning loopholes. And most importantly, I still had friends. I made 3 phone calls. The next week, concrete arrived. Legally. But let me take you back. Because before the foundation was poured, the range permits were filed, before the gunfire cracked the desert silence like a war drum, I had to endure the final push. And it came harder than I expected. On a cold Thursday morning, I found a notice stapled to my fence post. It was soaked, from dew, barely legible, but the message was clear. Final warning. Vacate unauthorized premises within 14 days or enforcement action will be taken. They couldn't evict me. I owned the land outright. But HOAs don't always play legal. Sometimes they count on fear. The next 48 hours were the most calculated chess moves of my life. They didn't just damage my property. They blocked the only drivable access road to my ranch with 2 dumpsters and a fallen utility pole, staged like an accident. The closest alternate route was 19 miles of rock and dust, impassable without a serious rig. I had no water, minimal, power, and no way to restock supplies. But they underestimated one thing. I'd lived through worse. I started rationing immediately. I cooked over open fire, boiled rainwater, rigged a makeshift windmill from salvaged steel that trickled enough energy to keep my radio alive. Then I did the thing they never expected. I invited witnesses. 2 friends, a veteran I served with and a former BLM inspector, came out and documented everything. Photographs, timestamps, GPS coordinates, every cut wire, every footprint, every broken piece of equipment. We didn't call the sheriff. We filed a land use claim directly with the Texas Attorney General's office and a quiet report with the State Land Commission. Because while they tried to starve me out, I had begun something bigger. I began laying out markers, exact distance, calibrated lines, range safety zones, and the land they thought was being taken from me, it was being repurposed. They didn't realize it yet, but I wasn't just resisting anymore. I was about to turn their entire strategy into the very thing that would bury them. Because if there's one thing they should have known, it's that you don't corner a man who's already lost everything. You give him purpose, and I had just found mine. They didn't just want me out. They wanted me broken. And I didn't know just how far they were willing to go until the trucks stopped showing up. It started with the cattle feed. Every 2 weeks a delivery came in from the feed co-op in El Paso, regular as clockwork. I'd shake the driver's hand, help him unload, talk shop for 10 minutes before sending him on his way. But then, one morning, no one came. I didn't panic right away. Things happen: weather, delays, breakdowns. I called up the dispatcher, a woman named Carla I'd known for years. Her voice on the other end wasn't just nervous. It was shaking. "Isaac," she whispered. "I shouldn't even be taking this call. We got a letter from a law firm in San Marcos. They said there's an injunction against delivering to your address, something about zoning violations and civil liability. My boss says if we deliver to you again, we're risking a lawsuit." Zoning violations? Civil liability? This was no coincidence. The HOA hadn't just tried to fence me out. They were using legal traps to cut off my supply lines. I told Carla I understood, thanked her, and hung up. I stood on my front porch for a long time that morning. The sun was climbing up over the ridgeline, burning off the morning fog, and all I could hear was the dry wind pushing through the brush. Then I saw it, a white SUV parked up on the bluff near the northern fence. A pair of binoculars just visible through the tinted glass. Watching, they were monitoring the fallout, seeing if I'd panic, if I'd cave. But they didn't know what kind of man they were dealing with. I didn't come from a life of luxury. I came from a family that fixed what we had, rationed what we couldn't get, and made things stretch when nothing else was coming. I could go lean if I had to. But this wasn't just about me. I had hands working the property, animals depending on me, and a community of border ranchers who'd been watching the HOA push people out one by one. I wasn't about to be next. But I needed answers. I drove into town that afternoon and pulled public records, and what I found made my gut turn cold. The HOA, officially listed as the Clear Rock Estates Protective Association, had filed a quiet amendment to their bylaws 6 months earlier. They reclassified several easement roads as emergency fire lanes, which conveniently intersected access points to nearby ranches, mine included. Then, in a maneuver so slippery it belonged in a courtroom thriller, they had secured a temporary injunction against dangerous industrial activities adjacent to protected residential zones. My property was listed as a non-compliant perimeter property. That's why my deliveries stopped, why my livestock couldn't be moved easily, why the fencing was just the first move. They weren't just trying to push me out, they were laying siege. Every rancher I spoke to over the next few days told me the same thing. Trucks stopped coming. Permits were being challenged. One family, a few miles south of me, had their well drilling delayed for months because of disputed historical access. The HOA's board president, a real estate investor named Craig Mortimer, had bought up 4 parcels of land to the east of the HOA's borders. Rumor was he was pushing to rezone the area for a luxury border retreat development, and my ranch? Right in the way. The kicker? He'd submitted an environmental hazard review, claiming that cattle ranching near the proposed community site presented risks to ecological stability. He was trying to erase generations of land use for a spa. I couldn't sleep that night. Not out of fear, but from the slow, simmering realization that this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about stopping a man from rewriting the land's future by any means necessary. The next morning, I drove 3 hours north to meet with someone I hadn't spoken to in a decade. My old friend and former command sergeant, Raul Mendoza. Raul ran a private security training firm out near Marfa, a blend of ex-military, law enforcement, and licensed firearms instructors. The kind of place you go to learn how to handle situations when things get complicated. He greeted me with a bear hug, looked me over and said, "You got that look again, Hermano. The one from Fallujah. What's going on?" I told him everything. Bye. The time I was done, Raul just leaned back, arms folded, and smiled. "You ever hear of Chapter 229 of the Texas Local Government Code?" he asked. I shook my head. It's the one that gives counties the right to regulate shooting ranges, unless the land lies outside of a municipality and meets certain acreage requirements. Like your ranch. And guess what? If you file the right paperwork and pass an environmental review, that land becomes exempt from HOA influence even if it touches their border. My eyes narrowed. "You saying what I think you're saying?" Raul grinned. "I'm saying they tried to starve you out, but maybe it's time you serve up something louder." The idea struck me like a bolt of lightning. Not just revenge. Legal, strategic retaliation. If Mortimer and his board were building a development that needed silence and serenity, what better way to make the land unappealing to investors than a fully operational, legal gun range? A community outreach facility, focused on education, wildlife defense, and border safety training. Not only would it ruin his plans, it would draw people back to the land for the right reasons. But first I needed proof of their illegal maneuvering. I filed a public disclosure request with the county records office and pulled HOA board meeting minutes. Most were sanitized, vague, but one entry caught my eye. Motion passed to expedite strategic deterrence for non-compliant property owners. Outside consultation approved. Legal and logistical coordination pending. Strategic deterrence. That was a military term, and I knew one man on their board who had a defense contracting background. I made a call to an old friend in Army intelligence. Gave him the name of one contractor the HOA hired through an LLC shell. What came back chilled me to the bone. They'd subcontracted Trident Consults, a firm under federal investigation for its role in domestic surveillance tech exports. In short, these HOA goons weren't just bullies with rules. They were using high-level consulting to track property owners and weaponize zoning law through predictive enforcement. This wasn't local governance. It was land warfare disguised as bureaucracy. I drove home that night with 2 things. Proof that the HOA was operating beyond legal limits. A new plan that would make them regret ever fencing me off. I filed an application with the county land board the next day for a borderland safety training facility, fully above board. Signed, notarized, and complete with aerial maps, projected, community benefits, and a 10-year business plan. Raul offered to train the instructors. Another friend, a wildlife officer, agreed to run border hazard awareness programs. Veterans from town would be hired to assist. We would teach kids firearm safety, host anti-poaching seminars, and offer free defense courses for nearby landowners, all on my property. And most importantly, right on the HOA's back porch. But I wasn't done. I hired a drone operator to capture weekly footage of HOA developments and fences encroaching past their legal limits. We compiled a report and submitted it to the Texas Land Stewardship Office and the State Department of Agriculture. Both agencies responded within 10 business days. One inspector called me personally. "Mr. Cross, I'm not sure how you managed to document this so precisely, but what you've uncovered is serious. You'll want to be present for the review hearings." Their world was about to get very public, but I kept my mouth shut. Let them watch. Let them think the fencing had worked. Let them believe I was boxed in and gasping. They had no idea what was coming. The real noise hadn't started yet, and by the time they heard the first round echo across the valley, it would be too late. Within 10 days of approval, Raul brought down his team, a small but professional group of veterans, instructors, and retired LEOs. We started converting the northern field into a 300-yard firing line with natural berms and hand-constructed barriers. Nothing excessive, just legal, loud, and entirely within compliance. I kept everything clean and well documented: daily noise logs, environmental safety reports, public signage. We weren't building chaos. We were building legitimacy. But let me tell you what really rattled them. It wasn't the shooting. It wasn't the sudden trucks delivering range equipment or hay bales for makeshift cover. It was the parking lot, right at the fence line. The same fence they built to choke me out. Now it faced half a dozen pickup trucks folding tables and signs that read, "Rural Border Readiness Seminar, open to all residents." Neighbors started coming. First, it was just a couple of retired ranchers, then Border Patrol families, then local press. People who were tired of the HOA's creeping control, people who missed the old code of the land. They came for the safety talks, the free classes, the company. And the moment that range opened fire, I swear the entire valley changed. Craig Mortimer didn't take it well. He rolled up to my gate in a black Escalade, sunglasses on, flanked by his lawyer and a man I recognized from the Trident Consult's records, former ICE intelligence. They didn't ask. They demanded. "Mr. Cross," Mortimer said, tone full of that arrogant hush only bureaucrats use when they're losing. "This facility is creating a hostile perimeter. We have noise complaints, emotional distress reports from our residents, and documented declines in neighboring land values. If you continue operations, we'll pursue an emergency injunction." I didn't raise my voice, didn't step forward. I simply held out a copy of the Texas Local Government Code, Chapter 229, marked, highlighted, and notarized by the same county office that approved my range. "You're not just wrong," I said. "You're trespassing." I let the silence hang. "Now kindly get off my land." The next week, the retaliation began in earnest. They filed 4 complaints. Wildlife disruption, claiming gunfire scared migratory species. Water use violations, claiming our water tank exceeded volume limits. Unlicensed instruction, saying Raul's team required state certifications. Terroristic intimidation, citing visible weaponry and proximity to children. All nonsense, all thrown out within 48 hours, and because I'd done my homework. Every license filed, every permit clean. Every instructor background checked and registered under Raul's federal training certifications. Still, the HOA needed a win. So they pivoted. They turned to optics. Local news outlets suddenly ran stories with vague headlines. "Rural rancher's gun range raises safety questions." "Border town grapples with escalating noise disputes." But they made a fatal mistake. They tried to use fear, and fear can be countered with truth. I invited the press out myself, not to the range, to the training sessions. They watched young women learn situational awareness drills. They saw wildlife officers teaching borderland survival skills to ranch families. They recorded veterans explaining how these classes could help rural communities reduce dependence on overwhelmed county services. I gave one interview, just one. "I'm not here to intimidate anyone. I'm here to protect this land, and the people who still believe it belongs to those who care for it." That quote went viral in 3 states. Then the final nail dropped. Remember those drone footage logs we'd been collecting? Turns out, the HOA had overbuilt their perimeter by 17 feet in multiple areas. They'd violated 2 federal conservation easements and encroached into a protected arroyo, triggering a state environmental review board investigation. The fine? $42,000 per violation. Total cost of cleanup and fence removal? $300,000, minimum. The HOA board tried to bury it. But that's the problem with operating in the shadows. Once the light hits you, everyone sees. The same week they received their violation notice, I hosted a Veterans Appreciation Shoot. Invitations went out to every county commissioner, sheriffs, deputy, wildlife agent, and border enforcement liaison. Half the local government showed up. One of them, a county supervisor, pulled me aside, clapped me on the back, and said, "You've done more for local readiness in 6 weeks than that HOA's done in 10 years. The HOA couldn't compete with that kind of respect, so they tried one last move, a buyout offer. They sent me a formal letter offering $2.8 million for the ranch, contingent on ceasing all firearms activity and signing an NDA about hostile encounters. They thought I was in this for money. I mailed it back with a single sticky note. You can't buy grit." But the final confrontation wasn't loud. It wasn't public and it wasn't legal. It was quiet, personal, raw. It was Craig Mortimer, knocking on my door alone at sunset. He didn't speak right away, just looked past me, out toward the range, where a father and his teenage daughter were walking the firing line with an instructor. Craig's voice was different this time, flat, worn. "You could have left," he muttered. "No one would have blamed you." I didn't reply. He looked at me again. "You're not going to stop, are you?" "No." He swallowed. "Then this whole development dies." I nodded once. "Good." That was it. He left without another word. By the time the next HOA board meeting rolled around, 3 members had resigned. The planned Clear Rock Retreat project was formally canceled. Investors pulled out. Construction halted. Their environmental fines ballooned with every week of non-compliance. Meanwhile, I expanded the range's outreach programs, started a small scholarship for rural teens interested in wildlife conservation, let the local 4-H club use part of the land for events, taught kids how to fire safely, hunt ethically, and defend what mattered without fear. The HOA tried to starve me out, but I didn't just survive. Turned the siege into a stronghold, and what they don't understand, what men like Mortimer never understand, is that when you build something from the soil up, with calloused hands and clean records, you don't scare easy. They can file papers. Write history. Section 4. Resolution and legacy will close the loop with public vindication, long-term consequences for the HOA, transformation of the land into a symbol of strength, and an emotionally resonant echo of the first section's defiance. Ready for the final chapter? They stopped sending letters in August. No more threats, no more legal notices. Not even the passive-aggressive newsletters about community harmony or unauthorized activity. Just silence, the kind that follows a collapse. I got the call from Marlene, a quiet county clerk with a sharp memory for signatures. She didn't even bother with small talk. "It's official. Clear Rock HOA has dissolved. Filing says they're merging into the Eastern Flats Municipal Oversight Group. But that's just cover. They're broke. Fined into the dirt." She paused. "You did that, didn't you?" I didn't answer. Didn't need to. By fall, the once manicured HOA land was overgrown. Their private roads, now public, cracked and forgotten. Their pool house sat abandoned, padlocked. Its luxury dream turned to mildew and silence. The investors pulled out first, then the contractors, then the lawyers, when their final Hail Mary lawsuit against my training facility got tossed with prejudice. Judge labeled it a malicious attempt to suppress lawful land use. By winter, the board had vanished like smoke. Craig Mortimer was never seen again in the county. Word was he sold his house to a developer for pennies on the dollar and took a job out in Marfa, the kind of place where HOA dreams go to die. I didn't rejoice, I didn't brag, because this was never about ego. It was about breathing again. The ranch grew quieter, but stronger. Raoul stayed on. We turned the temporary range into a permanent training site, not just for civilians now, but for wildlife rangers, rural police cadets, and even a couple National Guard reservists who needed terrain practice. The parking lot doubled in size. So did the community. We started hosting quarterly backland safety days, free medical first aid courses, firearm handling for first-timers, workshops on water security, ranch repairs, invasive species spotting, all the quiet things that keep border towns alive. It became something bigger than me. I didn't realize just how much had changed until I found a note tucked into our front gate one morning. It was scrawled in blue ink, folded twice, and stuck inside a worn envelope that simply read, "For Mr. Cross." Inside, "I used to be afraid out here. My husband travels a lot and the HOA never cared unless we were late on dues. But now I see your lights at night. I hear the drills. I know someone's watching. Thank you for making this place feel safe again." A neighbor you've never met. I stood there for a while, reading it over and over, the paper warm from my hands and the sunrise slowly hitting the gate. It hit me harder than any legal victory, because this was the legacy I was after. Not just land, not just sovereignty, dignity, for the people who still believe in standing tall without stepping on others. Later that year, I was invited to speak at the County Commissioner Safety Summit. Not as a defendant, not as an angry landowner, but as an expert. Raul joined me. So did two young ranchers who'd trained at our range and gone on to join the Wildlife Service. When I stepped up to that podium, I didn't wear a suit. Just my old ranch coat, boots dusty, voice calm. I talked about what happens when people get pushed too far, how control masquerades as community, and how quiet resistance, not screaming, not fighting, can reclaim freedom without ever firing a shot. In anger, all I ever wanted was space to live, to work, to raise up what my family built. And I believe that the more you try to fence people in, the more determined they become to break free. 2 years later, the county established a permanent Rural Response and Resilience Fund, partially modeled after the framework we built on my land. That's right. The same patch the HOA tried to starve out, became the model for emergency training across 4 districts, even got a state commendation. Funny thing is, they sent it in a crisp envelope with a gold seal. Same type of paper the HOA used when they first tried to evict me. Only this one said, "In recognition of exemplary service to public safety, land stewardship, and the preservation of constitutional rights." I hung it on the wall. Not out of pride, but for irony, right beside the first violation letter the HOA ever sent me, a reminder of where we started, and how far grit can take you when paper bullets fail. Sometimes kids from the new generation ask me why I never sold the ranch after all that, why I didn't just cash out once I won. They don't get it yet. See, money can build houses, but only roots can build home. And this land, this dust, these rocks, this stretch of nowhere is in my bones when you stand for something real, something older than permits and fences. The ground remembers you. It holds your footsteps long after you're gone. One evening I was walking the West Ridge checking fence lines when I saw something unexpected, a single sunflower blooming at the base of the fence the HOA had once built. Their concrete anchors long dug up, but that spot, that scar in the earth, still marked. The flower wasn't planted. It just showed up wild, defiant, alive. I stood there, wind pressing soft against my coat, sky turning amber above, and I said something I hadn't let myself say out loud until that moment. "You tried to starve me out." I crouched down, touched the stem, voice low. "But you only fed the roots.